This last week has been a pretty exciting one for me, given that, along with this week's episode of Severance, we also saw the return of Invincible, a show I reviewed Season 2 of over a year ago now, which is crazy. My thought process going into this week, video-wise, was simple. Whichever show gave me more to talk about in a video would be the one I would review. Then Invincible Day came, and surprise, surprise, 3 whole episodes dropped. I don't know if this was old news, but I had no idea, and as soon as I saw it, I thought, well, I guess I'll be reviewing Invincible. But no. Severance still won, with a single episode. And here we are. This past episode really sped things up, ending with, and I'm gonna assume you know this already, Mark, Adam Scott's character, reintegrating, meaning that he undid the severance procedure and should now be one whole person again. This, along with the fact that episode 4, Woe's Hollow, had been teased as one of the best and most exhilarating episodes of the season, created my hype for this week. And now having seen it, this truly is a special entry into the Severance universe. But not for any of the reasons I thought it would be. Spoilers ahead. The very first thing we see beginning this episode is Irving, opening his eyes to find himself in the middle of a giant patch of ice. He soon regroups with the rest of MDR, including Mark, and they find out they are on an Ortbo, which is essentially a little trip outside to a closed-off location, another perk of so-called severance reform. And this is when I am going to immediately address what is basically my only issue with this episode, which is that it mostly does nothing to acknowledge the last episode's ending. Now, I don't think that doing that would have made this episode's story better, but it's certainly awkward. So possibly changing up the placements of the episodes so that this does not come directly after the giant cliffhanger that is episode 3 would have been a good idea. All we get is a small tease that Mark is beginning to experience the same side effects that PD did in Season 1, but that's really it. We don't see any of the Audi characters either, making this the second time that has happened. Again, this is done in service of a better individual story for this episode, though it feels out of place in this season. That's all. However, what became glaringly obvious to me only minutes into the episode was that it is unbelievably and irrefutably one of the most unique episodes of the entire series. This entire episode takes place on this Ortbo through snowy mountains, making time for immense character study. The backdrops provided are truly beautiful, and the lighting does a lot to present the mood. There's one specific moment that is especially interesting with the context of the rest of the episode where Haley and Mark are in a tent, which has light shining through it, causing Haley to be lit in all red, before we cut to Irving, sitting outside against a rock with the most dim, drab darkness across his face. From a production standpoint, this is a feat that wasn't even necessary to progress the plot, but certainly functions as a welcome addition. Unfortunately, the sinister meaning of this journey comes to fruition pretty quickly once the group meets Milchick and is brought to a campsite where drama brews. I think it's pretty clear that the 4 MDR employees were brought out into the outside world so that they could be split up and suspicion could be cast to divide them. This is mostly done between Haley and Irving, as the latter still does not believe her story about what she saw as an Audi, also being bothered by her complete lack of care for any of the Egan stories that Milchick reads to them. After Irving openly calls out Haley for being a liar in front of the group, he is completely isolated, with not even Dylan being on his side. Very quickly, the purpose of this trip has been fulfilled, and Milchick didn't even need to be there to cause it. Another thing about this trip that is unique to this episode is the horror aspects. This show has always been creepy, but this feels like the first episode to integrate tropes of the horror genre such as jump scares and creepy ghouls and goblins. The first of these is the shadow versions of the 4 MDR employees, which are creepy, sure, but even more so when you think about where they come from. Are they paid actors? It seems bizarre that they would be able to hire 4 people who conveniently look vaguely similar to Mark, Haley, Dylan, and Irving. I mean, are we growing people or what? Probably not, but it's still a theory that holds some water. The most notable horrific scene, though, is when Irving goes off on his own and experiences a nightmare where the MDR floor reappears in this new icy landscape. He first sees Bert there, but next to him is a disheveled, almost zombie-looking woman still clicking away at her keyboard, another callback to Irving's aging, which has been affecting his performance the entire series. Since the beginning, Irv has had these daymares, moments of spacing out, and this is the most outwardly disturbed. However, it also gives him the answer to his wonderings about Helly. She is, in fact, Helena Egan. This is a fan theory that had spread so significantly that it had 90% of fans convinced that it was the truth. But I'll be honest, I had my issues with it. Sure, I believed it to be a very intelligent way of spying on MDR, and I still do, yet the fridging of Helly as a character seemed problematic to me. I was honestly in denial because of how much I disliked the idea of a character being replaced and given no development, because in my mind, I expected this to be revealed in some dramatically ironic way where the audience knows before the characters, and the real Helly would still not be present. Luckily, these genius bastard writers worked around that. Irving confronts Helena, grabbing her and forcing her underwater, threatening to drown her, and revealing her identity to the rest of MDR, as well as Milchick, who is horrified. It's clear that this was genuinely not part of Lumen's plan, even if there was so much that we didn't know about that was. This moment is the dramatic climax of many, many emotional storylines. Irving's delusions and his depression over losing Bert are both major factors in why he revels in his vindication and is so brutal in his actions. If this was simply due to his suspicion of Helena, he would have been much more peaceful, but he's been pushed to the edge. He's able to get Helena and Milchick to agree to switch her back to Helly, fixing my problem by giving us back the character as soon as we learn that she's been concealed. And immediately, Irving brings her out of the water and comforts her, showing that while his mental state has certainly been driven to the edge, he still has love for each and every single one of his MDR colleagues, which makes it all the more depressing when Milchick fires him. John Turturro has conveyed many emotions throughout this show, proving himself to be possibly its single best actor. I've praised him before for his softness and his incredibly accurate portrayal of this child in a man's body, but this moment truly shows his ability to burst out of his body with rage and chaos, and then resolve. The moment in which Irving effectively dies does not portray him as scared. He honestly seems satisfied. Irving began this season with what were essentially suicidal tendencies, ready to leave work forever, and so it's not surprising that the idea of being fired is not all that frightening anymore. The fact that for the innies, termination is the same as death is so bizarre and disturbing, given that Lumen can legally murder their workers, and no one sees a problem with this because they do not take the time to comprehend what firing truly means. I hope this is not the true end for Irving, but I would be fine with us instead focusing on his Audi, who seems to potentially have a blossoming relationship with Audi Bert, given that scene in episode 2 where Bert secretly watches him from his car. And thus ends Woe's Hollow, a cataclysmic episode considering how innocently it presents itself at first. It's also easily the best episode of the bunch, with the best visuals, the best performances, and the most happening. So much is set up by this point. Helly is back with no idea of what's truly happened while she's been gone. Lumen is in shambles as their ploy has been discovered, and now they really have no way of spying on their workers. Mark is beginning to show symptoms of his reintegration, which could possibly cause the death of both of his versions. Irving is terminated, leaving him to maraud the outside world and figure out what caused his firing. And Dylan is also here. Dylan didn't do much this time around. It's a 9 out of 10, and it's probably one of the best episodes across either season. Season 2 is honestly even more strange in structure than Season 1, but there's a feeling I get every time I watch a new episode that makes me not care. It's an exhilarating show, and if you're not already watching it, I just don't get how you're living. This shit is an event. This is a miracle. Bye now.